Okay, in this video I'm going to be talking about the first toxicity. I have trouble saying that word, so please bear with me when I say it. I don't know why, but I seem to have a bit of a tongue twister about it. So the first on this list is heavy metal toxicity, and I just want to very briefly say that this has probably, a lot of it is not within our control. And I say this because, to give you an example, asbestos many years ago, just as an example, was considered the best fire retardant, and it still is the best fire retardant that man has sort of produced within reason. Years and years ago, people thought, or they didn't think, that asbestos would actually cause a problem. It's not until in recent times, and I mean in the last 2 or 3 decades, that we've now begun to understand that asbestos is actually really quite dangerous if not handled correctly. Asbestos is still being used. Maybe the manufacturing of it and the handling of it is done very differently now, and so it's sort of within much of our control. And I mean our control as a generalization, in as much as manufacturing and the use of it in products has become more within our control, and we have become more aware about the toxicity, if you like, and the danger of using asbestos, just as an example. Now, the heavy metals, which are, the research that I've done, there's basically 5 heavy metals that have detrimental effects on us as human beings. And at some point in pretty much everyone's life, we will have been injected, been exposed to, inhaled, used. At some level, we will have been in contact with these 5 metals, 5 heavy metals, and they are toxic to us as humans on a physical level, and a sort of almost a chemical level. They are toxic to us. So they are, in brief, cadmium, mercury, lead, chromium, and arsenic. Now, I can link to the graphs and such like, and the effects that each of these metals have on us as human beings. But exposure to these at any length of time will cause problems within our body. And again, we've really only in the last few decades come to realize, I think, as a human society, we've begun to realize that these things have an effect on us, which then create issues within our bodies. So for instance, cadmium here is apparently a lung inflammation, but it can also cause the softening of our bones and excess in protein in urine, possibly kidney damage and lung cancer. Mercury has been talked about quite a lot. I think the first thing that people realize, or the first thing that people remember, maybe not so much nowadays, because in thermometers and stuff we don't use, apart from them being mostly digital now, but I remember in the days when mercury was something that you saw in a thermometer, and it was a silver liquid that used to go up and down in a thermometer, which obviously had its uses. But exposure to mercury is being used in an awful lot of products. And so there's a lot of chronic exposure, where if we are exposed to this in short term, it can create X amount of problems. And if we're exposed to it in the long term, over our lifetime, it can create, other problems in our body. Lead, a prime example of lead was that it was used in pencils many years ago, before the days of sort of the high uses of graphite. And so lead was being used in paints, for instance, and such like. And so what I'm trying to say is heavy metal toxicity is something that at the time, as humans, we take a product from the earth and we use it and we think, yeah, this is really, really good, without really looking into the long-term effects. And those, because again, money is more important very often than the effects it has on humans. And so, it was used in a lot of products, like paint, for instance. I'm not a chemist, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist by any means, but do your research and you will find that the impact of these heavy metals on us as humans has a detrimental effect in long term and short term. And so, all of the exposures and the detrimental effects are listed. I mean, it's quite simple, really. And so heavy metal toxicity, I think, kind of comes down to our awareness of those products, those metals that are being used in maybe things that we are exposing ourselves to. Is it in our environment? Is it in our home? Is it in our working environment? Is there a factory somewhere where you live that is pumping this stuff out into the atmosphere or into the water system or into the ground? Do you live in an area where there are heavy machinery like lorries and such like that are going up and down, within a reasonable distance of you, that could be shedding these chemicals out? This is what I really want this series of videos to be about, is to raise your awareness about these toxicities and the effect that they have on us as humans. And the thing with these toxicities, in my opinion, and from my research and from things that I've listened to surgeons and doctors and health professionals, etc., over decades that I've been researching this information out, because I want to be sure that I am limiting my risk and exposure to these things as much as I possibly can. So I want to know my environment, what is in my environment and what is in my workplace and in my home, and what I can do to be aware of my exposure to these heavy metals and to reduce that risk. Therefore, the assumption is made that if you are reducing your risk and exposure to heavy metals, therefore the knock-on effect is it's better for your health. That's all I'm saying, and that's all I will continue to keep saying throughout these whole videos. So, in short, do your own research, be aware of your exposure. Like, for instance, I know in dentistry that they were using mercury in fillings many, many years ago. And I know that I've got those fillings, probably not so much now, but I had those fillings years and years ago, because I'm old enough to have had them, done. And I know that dentistry have changed their practices and moved away from these heavy metals that were being used in things like fillings and dentistry in general, to other amalgams that are not so harmful to people's health. A bit like the use of lead in paints and such like, and the use of mercury. Our exposure to mercury was obviously quite high many years ago. Maybe not so much now, but again, we don't really know what's happening in the atmosphere a lot of the time around us anymore, because businesses and governments keep changing the goalposts all the time about the levels that are harmful or good for us or are tolerable for humans. So anyway, that's the first toxicity. As I say, do your own research and come to your own conclusions.